Several years ago, I was maybe 19 or 20, and we lived in the state's capital. Some family friends were coming to visit us during that summer, and my mom wanted to cook a particular dish for them. This dish is best served the next day as the flavors had time to develop. However, we needed chorizo sausage to make the dish, something my mom forgot about until 7 p.m. that night. As this was in the Midwest, chorizo was hard to come by, so a quick Google search revealed a small butcher shop close to our state capitol building. Mom called and they said that they had chorizo. Dad volunteered to go get it, and I agreed to go along because I was bored. When we got into our nice Cadillac Escalade, this is important to note, plugged the directions into our GPS and drove down. And while we were maybe 100 yards away from our state's capitol building, which is actually pretty nice, the neighborhood this butcher shop was in was not. The streetlights were out, windows were dark, houses had peeling paint. Some were boarded up and there were no cars in sight or anyone else around, not even walking their dogs. Something about this place gave me a weird vibe, and I mentioned to Dad that we should get the heck out of there. But we had a mission, and good luck trying to convince Dad to change his mind about something. We go into this butcher shop, and I don't know how in the world they managed to run without a visit from the health inspector, but holy cow, was it bad. It was hot and sticky inside, and I didn't hear any humming from the display cases, meaning the cooling elements weren't working. Inside the grimy display case are pork trotters, pig ears, and pork belly, and the flies were buzzing around them. The floors hadn't been mopped or even swept in God knows how long. How do I know this? Because we're leaving shoe imprints, and our shoe prints were the only ones there. As I pretended to busy myself by browsing the shelves, in reality, I was scanning the store and watching the exit for trouble because I didn't feel right being there. Dad asked the husband and wife manning the counter about the chorizo, to which they responded that they had sold out of the last of it, but they had plenty of fresh ingredients to make around for the right price. As Dad was trying to get his way out of their haggling and asking for directions for the closest grocery store, I noticed movement outside the smudged-in, smeared glass door. There were 4 burly-looking shadows outside, close to our car, which wasn't the only car out there, but a beautiful Escalade with all the bells, whistles, and it had just been detailed. In other words, we were a giant bullseye. Thinking fast, I pretended to look at my phone. "Hey Dad, Mom asked Lucia and she had plenty of chorizo," I said, a bit more cheerily than I had intended. Before Dad could ask what the heck was going on, I grabbed his arm and tugged at him. After a quick thank you, we got out of there. Fortunately, the burly shapes were gone. My knees were like jello, wobbling, and I was still on the adrenaline high. Dad was looking at me confused. "Hey, we don't even know a Lucia," he said as he unlocked the car door. "I know, I just wanted to get out of there because I had a bad feeling," I admitted as we both got in, locked the doors, and turned on the ignition. The car's headlights turned on, and not even 10 feet away were the 4 burly shapes. They were just standing there. They were 4 men, middle-aged, dressed in jeans, t-shirts, and caps. I noticed one of them was holding a crowbar, and they started walking towards us. I screamed, "Dad, get out of here." He didn't need to be told twice. Dad gunned it, and the Escalade, which is built for not only beauty but speed, accelerated. The men jumped out of the way and we took off down the road. We didn't stop until we were home. Mom was more glad we were okay than about the chorizo, especially when she learned what had happened. Fortunately, we were able to find some the next day at a reputable supermarket that specialized in Latino food. So, 4 guys dressed like thugs and carrying a crowbar. Let's not meet. I'm going to tell you the story of a terrifying old creep that had stalked me since I was 16 years old. I'm currently a 20-year-old female. So basically, to set the scene, I'm an average height, average size, 20-year-old female. I've been told I'm very approachable and perhaps too nice to strangers. I sometimes just don't have the heart to tell them to get away, and I definitely should. Obviously, I'm not going to give specific details, but I worked in a restaurant which was inside a bigger shopping center. My stalker, an old man named Eric, worked for the actual shopping center itself and not a store inside it like me. When I was 16 and first started my job, I was quite timid and awkward, and let anyone say pretty much anything to me. I didn't quite know what to say when older customers and other employees would make inappropriate comments to me. I would simply just laugh off whatever people would say or not respond. In my 16-year-old mind, this was a lot easier to handle. I had one other friend at my job who was my age, and her name was Jessica. Jessica had worked there for a lot longer than I had, and one day she asked me if I had heard of this guy who worked in the shopping center called Eric. Jessica described Eric as very strange. She didn't describe him as frightening or unsettling, or even someone to be afraid of, just as a very eccentric man. Really, she and other employees would laugh at his odd sayings and awkward behavior. Jessica has also told me that Eric had brought her a present on Valentine's Day: chocolate. Many would think this was friendly behavior or harmless flirting, if he wasn't a 50-something-year-old man bringing chocolates to a 16-year-old girl he barely knows. I began to see for myself that Eric wasn't just an innocent old man with a slight crush. He had other intentions. The first time I remember Eric approaching me was when I was filling up a machine near the entrance of my work. The machine was out of the view of all of the employees and the restaurant was empty, so this was pretty much the perfect time for a creep to approach without being seen. Eric wasn't supposed to enter my place of work when he was working at the shopping center, so he had deliberately gone out of his way to come and speak to me. To describe his appearance, he was your typical creepy old loner. He was gaunt, had gray hair with bald patches, and had beady little eyes which he never averted from yours, and I can't get him out of my head till this day. Eric must have sneaked up on me, as I looked up and he was standing right next to me, a little too close, and I could feel his breath on my cheek. My name is Lucy," Eric asked me. "Lucy, are you married?" He almost giggled after he asked me this. He had a smirk on his face which made me feel as if he was trying to pretend that he thought I was older than I was, and at 16, I looked 16. Eric liked to ask me questions that he already knew the answer to, just to see what my reaction would be, letting me know in his own way that he had been looking up information about me on social media. He would do this frequently. I began to clock on to the fact that Eric had been going a little further than just approaching me at work, and instead stalking my social media accounts in the weeks following this first encounter, such as Twitter and Instagram, when he began asking me very specific questions about things I had posted about in the days before. For example, I had posted on Instagram about a tattoo that I got, which was in homage to my favorite band. I was serving a customer one day, only to be interrupted by a shrill but quiet voice. It was Eric. His eyes were huge and he had a look of pure excitement and menace on his face. He had yet again entered my workplace when he wasn't supposed to, just to talk to me. He asked me, "Lucy, what's your favorite, insert the band's name here, song?" Eric relished in my discomfort. You could see by my reaction that I was clocking on the fact that he had been viewing my personal social media, and the thought of that made my blood run cold. I felt disgusting and violated. The tattoo that I had gotten was covered by my work uniform, so the only way you could have seen it was by going through my Instagram page. This creeped me out majorly, but somehow I just forced myself to forget all about it and I carried on working. Over the course of a few months, Eric would come into my workplace more and more frequently, asking me bizarre questions and still reciting back to me things that I tweeted about or posted on Instagram. Every time I would see him, I would get visibly uncomfortable, and he liked this and this is what he wanted. All the while this was happening, Jessica approached me and let me know that Eric had followed her in his car on her walk home from work, slowing down to ask her where she lived. I also had been told other disturbing news about Eric from multiple different people. It seemed as if he was becoming more invested in whatever his intentions were towards me and Jessica. News had traveled to one of my managers about Eric's unsettling actions towards me, and this manager informed me that a few years ago, Eric was rumored to have followed a young girl who used to work for our restaurant into a toilet. Things didn't quite make sense to me. He was known for being a creep, yet still employed at the shopping center. On one hand, I was glad to know I wasn't just creeped out for no reason, but on the other hand, I was frightened as he had been doing this for years, yet no one had stopped him. Anyways, there was a woman who worked at the same place as me called Rebecca, and she had some sort of disability which caused her to befriend and be trusting of people without knowing anything about them. It seems that Eric took advantage of her, as he had asked for her phone number and she gave it to him. Rebecca had shown me her text messages with Eric. He had texted her things like, "Rebecca, are you alone?" and "Rebecca, are you sat on the bus alone?" But the most unsettling part of it all was the text from Eric that read, "Rebecca, could you please let me know any information on the girls that work at insert restaurant name here?" I was stunned. This was quite slowly turning into my nightmare. I was constantly questioning why this old man was so hell-bent on finding out everything to do with my life. Why me? He had gone out of his way to source information about me through a vulnerable person that I worked with, and I was scared that he was going to go further. Again, this creeped me out, but still, for some reason, I forgot about it and carried on with my life, which was very hectic at the time. And in a way, I'm grateful that I didn't have the time to dwell on Eric's growing obsession. However, this was something I wouldn't be able to ignore forever, as Eric began inserting himself into my life in ways I just couldn't ignore or brush off. One night, I was watching the movie Grease with my family, and I must have tweeted something stupid like, "Grease is my favorite film," because it's a great film, right? Anyways, the morning after my tweet, Eric approaches me in his usual way and utters, "Do you like the film Grease, Lucy?" The same usual smirk lit up his face and the same usual wave of disgust washed over me. He was really making it a point to let me know that he was watching me. I tried to carry on with my day, but spent the entirety of my shift feeling a little shaken up. To someone reading this story, it may not seem as unsettling to you as it did to me at the time, but when someone is going out of their way to make you know they know information about you, you spend every waking hour about what they plan to do with this information, and why they insist on taunting you with this knowledge. The very second I clocked out of work and got into my car, my phone went off. This was a notification for PayPal. I clicked on the notification to see that I had received £3 from an Eric Stanley, and the note attached to it read, "To Lucy, Grease is the word," from Eric. He literally found my PayPal account and sent me £3 with a quote from the movie attached to it. If this wasn't crazy enough, in the days following, I received a string of anonymous calls, incessant calls one after the other. I was in a flood of tears and ended up having a huge panic attack. I felt like there was no escape. My phone rang and rang and rang all night. I had to turn it off to get away. Even when I turned my phone back on, the calls continued, and every time my phone would ring, my head felt like I was being impaled with the sharpest knife in the world. I was on complete edge. The phone calls that I did answer were just someone breathing down the phone, making a point to breathe heavy. I even swear that they were trying to sound like they were playing with themselves, which sickened me. I had no proof this was Eric, but it wasn't hard to put two and two together, after all the lengths he had gone in order to track down my personal information. If he had found out my PayPal address, my phone number, and all of my social media accounts, what was stopping him from finding where I live, breaking in, hurting me or my family? That night, I had horrific dreams in which he chased me around my house and taunted me for hours. I still have similar dreams and struggle to sleep without my boyfriend present, as I'm scared he's standing right outside my door to this day. I reported Eric to my managers and they passed my complaint on to the managers of the shopping center. At this point, I was genuinely scared for my safety. Multiple girls added to my statement and added details of times they had witnessed Eric's unsettling behavior, or times that he had been inappropriate with them too. Eric had been cautioned by the shopping center's management, yet nothing was done, except the fact that he was warned not to talk to me. Eric found ways about getting around the no talking to Lucy rule. He would make animal noises at me when he would see me, like a monkey or a dog or any bizarre noise that would get my attention. I think he just wanted me to think that he had outsmarted me, that he had found a way around the rules. After this, I stopped working at the restaurant as a full-time job. I saw Eric less and less, which was obviously great for me. I moved cities as I went away for university and made new friends which distracted me from my old life in my hometown. I still thought about Eric every now and then, and when I focus on it for too long, I can't be alone, out of fear that he's still keeping tabs on me. The thought of that terrifies me. After moving away and starting my new life, I forgot all about the twisted man who used to obsess over me at my old job. I forgot he existed, but I was soon going to remember. On Christmas Day, I was back home in my hometown with my parents. My phone buzzed and I expected it to just be another message from a friend or a family member, but I was wrong. I received a notification from PayPal. It was the exact amount of £3, only not from Eric this time, but from a girl whose name I didn't recognize at all. I opened up the PayPal app only to see a note attached to this payment that I had received. The note read, "Sending on behalf of Eric." My blood ran cold again. I had forgotten all about this man and all he had done to make me feel unsafe and unsettled, and here he was again, antagonizing me, yet this time doing it through other people. Perhaps his way of telling me that him being banned from talking to me himself won't stop him from entering my world. I threw my phone down on the couch and spent the night drinking with family, until I forgot about the notification. I probably should have told somebody about it, but I just wanted to do as much as I could to block him out. I didn't want him to control me anymore, and since I hadn't seen or heard anything from him, I wanted it to stay that way. I think Eric still works at that shopping center and lives local to me. I avoid my old workplace so I don't have to see him, and he doesn't have to see me. So, to the creepy, beady-eyed freak that made me live in fear, let's not meet again. As a child, think kindergarten age, I loved to talk. If anyone had a question for me, I would gleefully give them way too much information. Most people found it endearing and would praise me for being so smart, which only encouraged me a lot. My mom and I normally shopped at the market just a few minutes away from our house. My mom had been shopping there for 20-some years at that point and was friends with most of the workers, so I was friendly with them too, and was always happy to talk with them. Whenever my mom got distracted talking to someone, I, with the attention span of a 6-year-old, would wander around the aisle. My mom would keep an eye on me to make sure that I didn't get too far, but if she was distracted, one of the employees would usually be around and gently guide me back over. One day though, we went to a different market that I couldn't remember having been to before, and we didn't go back to for nearly a decade. We were walking around the aisles when my mom ran into her friend. They started talking and I, not even realizing that I no longer had a store full of adults keeping an eye on me, started wandering around the aisle. My eyes caught some colorful display, I think flowers or balloons or something, and I went over to look. Once I was satisfied with my inspection, I turned back to the aisle only to find my mom wasn't there. That had never happened before. I looked around a little, though not moving from my spot near the colorful displays. Since it was right near the registers, there was a decent amount of people nearby, which I'm thankful for now. As I was looking around, an employee came up to me. He was older than my sister, she was 12 or 13 at the time, and younger than my dad, in his mid-40s, which was about the only way I could gauge age. Now, I would say he was probably in his early to mid-20s if I remember right. "Hey there," he said sweetly, in that tone you normally speak to kids in. I cheerfully said hello, actually stepping a little closer. "Are you looking for your mommy?" I said yes, happily explaining that I had just last seen her talking to her friend, and that I could normally find her easily when I wandered away, so I wasn't sure where she could have gone. "Does she leave you alone often?" "Not really. My older sister was normally with me if my mom wasn't. She was 12 or 13 and she was super mature. So if my mom had to leave for a little bit, she knew I would be okay. And she never left us alone in public, just at home if she needed to run somewhere. Never for very long, just the length of time of a Pokemon episode or something. And my dad was at work a lot, and didn't come back until late usually, just if you were wondering." "Where do you live?" "Well, wouldn't you know, I just learned my address. We just learned how to mail a letter in school. Even took a little class trip to the mailbox in our school corner to send them out. I knew how to write my address now, and I knew how to say it. You want to hear?" "Of course you do." I know kids are naive, but I was downright dumb. I was diagnosed with doodle color blindness 2 years later, otherwise known as red-green color blindness. Makes sense, as I was totally blind to all the red flags. "Where do you go to school? Who picks you up?" "Well, I go to the local elementary school. I don't know the address though, sorry, but I know what street it's on, because I wait on the sidewalk for my mom or daycare sitter depending on the day. So I see the street line a lot since I'm usually waiting for a while to be grabbed." "Do you like animals? Like puppies?" "Dogs scare me, cats scare me, pigeons scare me, fish scare me, flies scare me. But you know what doesn't scare me? Turtles. I have 5 turtles. No dogs that might bark or bite if someone drops by the house, like our neighbor does. Those dogs are always behind the gate though, so they don't scare me a lot." It had only been a few minutes since I last saw my mom. Even with how much information I was dumping, I was a very fast talker. But I was starting to get a little antsy. Not because I was uncomfortable talking to a stranger, but because I had skipped lunch that day specifically to con my mom into letting me get a bagel from the store next door, which was why we were at that market in the first place. My mom was holding onto the bagel to make sure that I didn't try to eat it too fast and choke, which I had done several times in the past. I wanted my bagel, and while I liked talking to this grown man who made me feel smart and was also interested in my life, I liked bagels more. Plus, if I called my mom when we were near the bakery section, I might be able to use my charming cuteness to get a cookie. So I gotta find my mom now. "Oh well, I'll walk around with you and help you find her. You want to lead me through the market you work at where you could easily bring me to the back room, meat locker, any number of places." "Yeah, that sounds good." "Ozzy!" I look around to see my mom. The relieved look on her face slowly changing into something more anxious. I smile happily and wave her over. She immediately grabs my hand and I can tell she wants to chide me, probably for leaving the aisle, but she seems more occupied on the man in front of me. Before I can even open my mouth to introduce him, or whatever that I never even got his name, he quickly says that he was glad I found my mom and he needs to get back to work, and practically runs to the back of the store. My mom puts her hand on my shoulders and looks me in the eye, her expression a lot more worried now. "What was he talking to you about?" she asked, her voice more serious than I had ever heard her. "Can I have my bagel?" My mom opens her mouth, pauses, and goes into her purse to hand me the bagel. Between bites, I happily tell her about the conversation and everything I remembered. My age and grade, pickup schedule, likes and dislikes, my literal address. My mom gradually becomes paler, and then became red with anger. She brought me over to the manager and I don't remember much about the conversation. I got a cookie, I remember that pretty well. It was shaped like a watermelon, which was apparently far more important to me than paying attention to what was being said. The police weren't called. We went home and my mom told me I wasn't allowed to walk around the store anymore. No more talking to any stranger, even if they worked at the store we were at, unless she was with me. And if I ever saw that man ever again, I was to run away, find someone I know and ask for help. If all else fails, scream at the top of my lungs, just like when a fly lands on me. God, insects are creepy. I agree pleasantly, not really fazed by anything she's saying. I know that some people are bad, but bad people look bad, right? They talk mean and look scary and try to grab you. This guy didn't, so he wasn't bad, was he? But if my mom was saying it, then I would listen. And I'd better enjoy that cookie because we weren't going back to the store ever again. Tears incoming. In exchange, I can get a donut once a month from our usual store. Tears canceled. When I was around 12, our school had a safety assembly and was talking about these shady things adults do to get close to kids. And a very, very watered down version of what they most likely wanted. And I'm sitting there listening and suddenly realize, oh, if my mom hadn't found me, something bad might have happened. If not in the store, then in front of my school. And if not in front of my school, then my house. A little over a decade later, I'm 18 now, and I've never seen the guy again. Let's keep it that way. So, I'm 23 now, but when this happened, I was 17. In my last year of high school, I was the art chick. I was working on my portfolio so that I could apply to art school. I mainly did landscapes, but part of the requirement from our portfolios was life drawing. Obviously, my high school didn't have any nude life drawing classes, so my art teacher linked me up to a life drawing class at the local university, which is one of the top art institutions in the UK. So from my school, I had to get a half-hour bus to the center of the city, and then walk maybe 15 minutes up a long stretch through the student district. It was a 6-week course and this happened the 5th week. The class was really interesting and I learned a lot since this was my first time working with life models. I was pretty confident and not too worried about walking alone at night. The class finished at maybe 9 p.m. and it was pretty dark by the time that I got out. So, 4 weeks of walking there and back, uneventful. The 5th week walking there, totally fine. 5th week walking back to my bus stop, also totally fine. The 5 minutes at that bus stop, freaky as hell. So the stop I had to wait at was outside the expensive private school in my city. There's a strip with about 4 bus stops and it's always pretty busy. So busy that people don't even see what's happening right in front of them. So, I must have been one of the first people there, so I'm standing just outside of the shelter because I'm smoking. And obviously, I don't want to be a dick and make other people breathe in my smoke. So there were only a few minutes left until my bus, and I'm minding my own business when this guy comes up and stands super close to me. Like not as in infringing a bit on my personal space here close. Like literally, I can feel him standing against me. He must have been in his 40s, and just had that general creepy vibe, and looked really grubby and disgusting. So obviously, I'm a bit freaked out and I sidestep away. So does he. I look at him and he has the creepiest smug grin. By this point I'm like, okay, so he's trying to freak me out and he knows that I know. I step away again, like fairly far away this time. He follows me again and is literally standing with the front of his body dead up against the back of mine. Honestly, I don't know how nobody noticed this or called him out. We were outside the shelter and it was dark. People are on their phones or in their own conversations. I guessed it must just have been that. 23-year-old me is so pissed off at what an idiot I was for just shrinking away from him. This was before I had a few more similar experiences that have shaped my loud-ass radical women's rights advocacy. I literally just froze in the moment, even though there were people around who would have helped. I let this creep stand and push his dick up against me, probably for the same reason we all allow this shit. I don't want to overreact. Maybe it's a misunderstanding. I don't want to seem rude. Please note that I am no longer afraid. And so anyways, it gets worse. After dodging the creep for a few more moments as time dragged in slow motion, Finally, this bus comes around the corner. Now, I might not have reacted properly, but I'm not stupid. I know that if I get on the bus before this guy, he's gonna sit next to me, which is what I needed to avoid. So politely, I gesture and say, "After you." He gives me that creepy look again and says, "No, you go first." I insist, but he refuses again. There's a big queue now, and I don't want to hold anybody up, so reluctantly, I get on right before this guy. I get on the bus and do the only reasonable thing, which is to sit next to an old lady right at the front of this empty bus. The seats are in pairs, so there's no way that he can sit beside me now. Like I said, this bus is almost empty. So where does he sit? In the seat directly behind me. Great. So I'm just sitting there trying to ignore him, which is pretty difficult to do when this guy keeps leaning forward and literally playing with my hair. I have really long hair and his hands are on it. So don't ask me why, but at the time, my phone would let me call my mom. But whenever I tried to text her, the sending bar would just stick. I don't know if anyone else has had this on iPhone, but when the little green bar at the top gets to about 90% of the way, it just sticks. That happened literally every time I tried to message her. Obviously, I was scared to call her. I didn't want him hearing what I had to say. I messaged my friend and told her what was happening, and that I thought that if I got off this bus, the guy would most definitely follow me. I still had a 10-minute walk home after I got off this bus up a long straight road. So my friend calls my mom and tells her what's happening. My mom then calls me and relays what my friend had told to her. Now, I had been on this bus for about 15 to 20 minutes and my stop was coming up in 5. It's not a big city. My area is suburban and I don't know everyone, but I think I recognize most. But I had never seen this guy before. He wasn't local to my area, so I reasoned he had definitely been on this bus longer than his stop. Anyway, when my mom called, I just said to her, "I'll be getting off in about 5 to 10 minutes. You need to get to X Street now and meet me." As soon as I said that, the creep pushes the button for the next stop. Literally as soon as I say it. He stands up and makes sure to bang into my arm and drag his body hard across as he walks past. He stares at me from the door and through the window as the bus drives away. I'm not 100% certain if he actually had bad intentions, or if he just got off on freaking out a 17-year-old girl who was on her own. The fact that he had pressed the button as soon as I had confirmed someone was meeting me makes me think he intended on following me. I didn't go to the final week of that class. So when I was in high school, it was my senior year. I was 5'3", about 95 pounds. I was at the park down the street from my house waiting for the school bus. Usually my boyfriend, who was already graduated, would drive me to school, but he was busy. I later found out that he was cheating. Well, there was usually a few of us girls there waiting, but this day I was the only one. So I sat on a bench and had one headphone in and one headphone out, so I could listen to my surroundings. I've always been cautious of what's going on around me. As I waited, a black Honda pulled up and I immediately noticed it. I kept an eye on it because I had a bad feeling about it. I wasn't making it obvious that I was watching it because I didn't want to look crazy, but after a few minutes, 2 big men got out. I immediately texted my boyfriend that I was at the park, and these guys were creeping me out. Of course he didn't text back, so I copy-pasted the same text message to my cousin who was home. I lived with my aunt and 2 guy cousins, unwinding down from the night shift. I wanted someone to know the car make and color, plus it was 2 men. I didn't get any responses though. When they got out of the car, they started to walk towards me. So I got up from the bench and walked towards the street because the bus was supposed to be there any minute. The driver actually ended up being a little bit late. As I stood by the street, these men walked up to me and I could feel the bad energy. One guy said hello as the other stood there staring me down. I just did a small smile and a nod and then looked away. And then the same guy, I'll call him number 1, asked how old I was. I didn't respond. I could tell the other guy, number 2, was getting mad that I wasn't feeding into it. The number 1 kept asking me yes or no questions, like, do you have a boyfriend? Do you live close? Do you do drugs? We have some, do you want some? And then number 2 asked me if I knew what the black market was. I felt a cold rush go over my body and I got the chills. Number 2, who was quiet the whole time, started to tell me they just got back from Russia, but the way that he said it was so scary, almost intimidating. I knew they were from somewhere else because they had strong accents, but I couldn't pinpoint the place. They kept telling me to go to their car because they have drugs. I said no thank you. Trust me, I wasn't a straight edge in high school, but I wasn't stupid either. I would never get into somebody's car that I didn't know. And then number 1 asked if I had a car. I said no and that my bus is almost here, sorry, I have to go. And by some sort of miracle, the bus rounded the corner and the guys backed off. They had been inching closer and closer as they asked me more questions, but before the bus got to me, number 1 handed me a card and said he has a car shop and to call him sometime if I need anything. He even stated he would give me a free car. The card looked shifty and I didn't want to grab it, but I knew that I needed that number on to report it. So I took it and they walked off super fast. Finally the bus stopped and it picked me up. As soon as I got on it, I started to cry. I had a complete meltdown. It was like all the adrenaline was keeping my mind and body aware and focused while the men were there, but as soon as I was safe, my body and mind gave out. Thankfully, there weren't many people on the bus, so the driver calmed me down before we took off, and I explained to her what had happened. When she looked around for the car, they were gone. She said that she saw them around me but thought I knew them because they were so close to my person. The driver called into her dispatch saying that there was an incident so that they could notify the school. She continued to pick up the other students, but when we got to the school, she walked me into the office. I was absolutely terrified to be alone. The principal came out and so did campus security. They were sweet and gentle with me as they brought me back to the principal's office. Both were men and they proceeded to ask me questions about the 2 men earlier, their car, and the questions that the creeps had asked me. I cried the whole time. And then I pulled out the card the guy gave me and handed it to the principal. He looked at the security and said he was going to call it and act like my dad, and so he did. It was on speaker and number 1 answered. I knew his voice as if it had been burned into my brain. It took everything in me not to have a panic attack. The principal asked the guy if he could get him a car at a good price, and the guy played dumb. The principal said his daughter, me, gave him the card. As soon as he had said this, the guy hung up. They tried calling again and the phone was shut off, and then eventually disconnected. I could see a shift in the principal and security as soon as the phone had clicked. The security got on his phone and called the police, and had them come to the school. It was as if they finally knew it was real, like my crazy story wasn't made up. The principal excused himself and the security guard, and they talked for a minute in the hallway. I could hear everything they were saying. She's lucky to be alive. This is serious. We need to call her parents to come get her. When the police got there, they came into the office that I was sitting in and asked me for the story again, and in front of the principal and security guard. I feel like they wanted to see if I was being 100% honest, so I obliged. The officers were straight up with me and told me that it sounded like they were watching us girls at the park because they chose the one day that one of us were alone. He also said the card was being used as bait to get me to go where they wanted. I felt sick and I couldn't breathe. The school called my aunt, but she didn't pick up. The only person that picked up first was my boyfriend. One of the officers talked to him as the other finally got a hold of my aunt. My boyfriend ended up picking me up and taking me home, and I cried the whole time. When I got there, my grandma, uncle, aunt, and mom and cousins were all out front. The women were all in tears and the men were livid, but worried for me. A week later, some girl at another high school not far from the park was saved by other students. She was being dragged into a black Honda by the two guys. The other kids had stood up and grabbed her and pulled her out of the car. The principal called me into his office, and that's how I found out. They also had these same officers there and had me choose the two guys out of a picture lineup. I pointed them out so fast, and they were caught. It was in fact those two guys that tried grabbing the girl, a freshman girl. I felt worried for her and sad she went through much worse than I did, and I felt almost free again. Still scared but not looking over my shoulder as often, I couldn't believe they were caught. After that, my family teamed up to drive me to school for the rest of the year. My boyfriend, now ex, also took me some days. I'm thankful to be alive and well, and I'm even more thankful that the girl was also saved by the courageous kids at her high school. So I just moved to New York back in July from Mississippi, and hadn't had any problems until January. So I go to a high school that's maybe 10 minutes driving away from my house, and I take the bus every day to and from school. Usually my mom will pick me up from the bus stop and take me home, and I usually only have to wait like a minute or two. But this day, I was waiting for like 10 minutes, and I called her a couple of times and she didn't answer. So I assumed that she had fallen asleep, like she does sometimes. So I decided to walk home. I usually go in a straight line for 3 streets and then make a right and walk straight down from there. On this day, I was wearing a tank top with a jacket on, Batman pajama pants, and old school style Vans. The perfect outfit for walking in the snow, right? Anyways, as I'm walking straight down, I see a man who is in front of me, and walking the same way as me, so I take the right turn early, as I can just walk that way, but it just involves a couple of more turns. Because I like to be cautious when dealing with other people on the street, especially if I'm alone. So as I'm walking down and starting to make the right turn, I see the man is now walking the opposite way he was before, and is now walking towards me, which sets off some red flags in my head immediately. This guy is probably 5'11" to 6 foot tall, wearing a black beanie, a tan jacket, and blue jeans, and I'm a very small girl, 5'2", so I knew that if he wanted me, he definitely had a high chance of getting exactly what he wanted. So I naturally start walking faster than I already was and turn as he's probably 10 yards away from me, and I'm walking really fast straight down. I'm walking for about 5 minutes, turning around to check and see if he had made the turn after me, and I didn't see him until the last time I turned around. He made the turn and he was walking straight for me. So I start speed walking, while I'm also on the verge of a panic attack, and all adrenaline is kicked in, and then so does he. I stay at the same speed for a couple minutes, so I don't tip him off and let him know that I can see he's following me. After that couple of minutes, I see my house, and I just book it to my house and turn around to see him running after me. I finally make it to my house, and just start crying as soon as I get inside the door. So one Sunday afternoon, I was waiting at the bus stop alone after an outing with a friend at the mall. The bus stop was at the final stop for all the buses, so there were many buses coming and going and staying. I saw a bus driver get onto the bus and asked if he was a 14, and he said that he wasn't going to be driving, so I said okay and patiently waited for my bus. A few minutes later, I saw him get into a bus. He made eye contact with me. I think he was wearing sunglasses, and then he gestured with his hand to come to him. So, me trying to be nice and being a kind person, I did just that. He told me to take off my mask because he couldn't understand me when I tried to talk. He then proceeded to tell me how beautiful I am, and how I was such a rare beauty, and how he's never seen anyone as beautiful as me before, and who gave me these gleaming eyes and so on. I am used to guys who are significantly older than me hitting on me, because I am well aware that I am pretty, and I look 18, so I generally like to inform them that I'm 15, and they tend to leave me alone after that. But this guy didn't seem to care one bit that I had just turned 15, and continued to flirt even though he was 26. He proceeded to make sexual comments about my body and kept looking at my chest. He was about my height. I'm 5 feet tall. After 10 minutes of conversation, he asked me about my sex life, and I had enough, so I texted my mom to call me. When I was on the phone with her, I was getting off the bus and he grabbed my hand. I yanked it away from him and got off, feeling sick. We went to the police station to report it, and I had to do a confrontation. Basically, they brought him in with zero warning, and I had to tell him or confront him. He argued like a 7-year-old, and I actually got him to confess in 6 minutes. But please, let's not meet again. I don't even know where to start this story. I was kind of young at the time, around 7 or 8, but old enough to know what was going on. I lived in a pretty decent neighborhood, but my family was in the process of moving. There is a large mixture of families with children and retired seniors living on my street. There is a neighborhood babysitter who took care of my younger sister when she was too young to go to school. She also happened to babysit me on multiple occasions. She was always kind of rude, a pudgy lady with 2 annoying sons and a very weird husband. A lot of kids got taken care of by her, so my parents trusted her to take care of us. Everything was somewhat normal, except for the fact that she was kind of rude to anybody that wasn't her own kid. Her kids were pretty misbehaved. They were always fighting, hitting each other with plastic swords, and screaming at the top of their lungs. At one point, the younger toddlers had a nap and she forced all the children to sit in a corner and be quiet, besides her kids. Odd behavior for a babysitter, but we never thought so much about it. Another thing to mention is that she took naps while babysitting. As in, she didn't pay attention to the kids. She just shooed them away and fell asleep. She was also notorious for giving her sons chocolate milk and telling others that they had to have water. My sister and I tried to ignore it, but eventually we were kind of annoyed. My sister had a loud mouth, so she told my mom about how she treats the kids she babysits versus her own children. I would also like to acknowledge that my sister had just turned 4, so she wasn't great with words. My mom was angry that the babysitter did that, but let it slide, as we were moving in a month and she didn't know if we were being completely honest. The house that we moved to is the house I spent a large majority of my childhood, teen years in. Things were normal once we transitioned into the new house, until we got the calls. We had changed our phone number, so we weren't sure how the babysitter and her husband found it so quickly. They called every day, saying that we needed to pay her and that we owed her money. She was just angry that we had moved, and we're currently on the lookout for a babysitter that was closer to home. My parents received these calls every day, and they consisted of the babysitter and her husband screaming, which meant that I could hear the voicemails calls quite clearly. They kept harassing us and my parents grew agitated and worried. It all ended one night at around 10 p.m. when my sister and I woke up to the sound of banging on the front door. It continued for a good 10 minutes and it was very loud. My sister was freaked out, so I decided to go see if my parents were awake. They were. They were just opening their eyes, kind of confused as to what was going on. My dad told my mom to stay upstairs and he foolishly went downstairs to get the door, as I stood at the railing nervously. My sister stayed in the bedroom, because she was unaware as to what was actually happening. When he opened the door, I felt sick and terrified. There was my babysitter and her husband, who managed to find not only our address, but also our phone number. The husband started screaming at the top of his lungs, yelling, "You owe us money, pay us," and shaking a knife. Yeah, he had a knife in his hand. My dad told him that we didn't and he warned him to leave, unless he wanted the cops to be called. He didn't care. My dad went to close the door, but he stuck his foot in it, attempting to get inside. My babysitter was also yelling, but I couldn't hear what she had to say. We had a phone upstairs, so my mother quietly called the cops, as my dad struggled to get the door closed. Once he did, the banging and screaming continued. They wouldn't leave our property. I was freaked out, so I started crying. My sister saw me crying, and she did the same. Long story short, about an hour later they left, and the cops arrived, having just missed them. My parents knew their information based on the fact that they had babysat for us, so it wasn't hard to track them, and they were arrested. I always wondered if their children were home alone or at a sleepover, especially at a time so late. Regardless, they were released a few days later, but were not allowed to step foot near our house. I'm not sure if the woman still babysits, but if she does, I feel terrible for the kids. We never really knew what their intentions were that night. My dad saw the knife and knew that they were up to no good. When I was around 15, I had started babysitting a family with 3 kids, 2 boys and 1 girl. Their mom knew me, as the oldest was friends with my little brother, and had asked my mom if I could help out just because she had started to take on more shifts and her husband was doing the same. They lived right next to my high school and paid well, so I agreed despite not really having that much experience. Pretty quickly I realized that it was going to be difficult. The kids were great, but I was nervous around them. The oldest was totally fine, and just played on his Xbox most of the time or did his homework. But the 2 youngest were a different story. The middle child, the daughter, was completely obsessed with horror movies, and on more than one occasion, I had to hide the knives from her since she wanted to reenact them. And the youngest son tried to set fire to the Christmas tree. I know what kids can be like since I have a lot of younger and older cousins, but these ones drove me insane and I would constantly worry about them hurting themselves or each other. If they played up, I would threaten to call their mom, which normally would work. It was after a few months that I realized that if I had mentioned the dad, that's when they would really just behave and do what I had asked, so that's what I started doing. Now, I never really ever met the dad. I just knew that the guy was pretty tall and he was a big build, but was always described to me as still being really nice, so I never thought about it. On this occasion, I had said to the youngest boy that I would call his dad if he didn't stop behaving, which resulted in a huge tantrum. So I ended up calling him and explaining. Luckily for me, the dad was getting off work early, so he said that he would get home as quick as he could, and apologized for the kid's behavior. When I had explained this, the kid was sobbing and ended up locking himself in his room. That day, the dad got home and they weren't joking around when they said that he was tall. I'm only 5'3" and I was 15. When I saw him having to crouch a little to get through the door because of his size, I remember thinking, oh crap, no wonder the kids won't misbehave when he's here. I said hi and apologized for the work call, which he just brushed off and said that it needed to be done and not to worry. We were both sat on the couch. I can't really remember why, but I think we were talking about what days they needed me for. Now at this stage, the 2 youngest had went outside to play while I was in with the oldest, as I had just been tidying a little from dinner. I was pretty weirded out because his oldest started to get pretty antsy when asked to go to the shop. Kept making excuses to his dad, so I just offered to go. I could see the dad visibly frustrated, and just wanted to defuse the situation. Now, I would like to point out that everything seemed normal at this point, but I remember feeling really intimidated by the dad. I'd only met him this one time and spoke for no more than 20 minutes. It turns out that the oldest had said to his mom that he didn't want me left alone with his dad, as he had apparently been watching me a little too closely during our short encounter. The parents had asked me to babysit later on in that week, which I had agreed to. However, in the space of a few days, that quickly changed. I got a text from mom apologizing for the last-minute arrangements, but saying I couldn't babysit. I was a little agitated since I had changed plans but wasn't too bothered, and just said that it was fine, and to let me know when she needs me. She had asked me to come around to get my pay for the last 2 weeks, and I decided to just nip around before going home. As soon as I was in the house, I could tell something was off, but not wanting to pry, I just went in to say hi, talking about books for a little bit, and I laughed. It wasn't until the next week, I think, or week after that, where everything kicked off. I came home to my mom being upset and angry, pacing the living room while my stepdad was trying to calm her down. I immediately went to her asking what was wrong, feeling a little worried. Instantly, she just threw her arms around me and started crying and holding me. I had meant to be babysitting, but again, got canceled on, so I was home earlier than what I had said originally. Pulling away confused, I asked her what was wrong again. It turns out my mom had been trying to get a hold of me, but my phone had died. I had went to babysit and nobody was home, so I just decided to head back on the bus, but wasn't able to let my mom know. She sits me down and starts trying to ask me questions about the dad and my time babysitting. Confused, I had mentioned that I had only met him once and only really spoke to him on the phone a handful of times, when the kids were acting up. Nodding, my mom started pressing on, and asked if anything else had happened and kept questioning me, saying that I could tell her anything. I just looked at her confused and told her that nothing had happened, and asked what this was all about. I always remember her taking a deep breath and saying, "Oh, thank God," before letting me know what happened. Now, as I said, the details are vague because this was on the news. Turns out the guy had killed someone while working and had been taken in by the police. During interrogation, it turns out that he admitted to beating his wife, and there were speculations of assault. There was also mention that one of his types were petite girls that had dark hair, or pale, which happened to match my description at the time, and my mom was terrified in case something had happened. I'm turning 23 this year and it still gives me shivers. I remember feeling like I was going to throw up and had a sinking feeling in my stomach. My mom held me close crying because she had been worried sick all day and scared in case something had happened. Needless to say, I stopped babysitting for the family right there and then. I had felt so awful for the wife as she was honestly one of the nicest women I had ever met. About a week later, I got a text from her as it turns out that I left some books, so I said that I would go get them after getting off the phone. When I saw her, my heart sank. She had obviously not slept, and was putting on a brave face for the kids who weren't sure what was going on. We ended up sitting in the kitchen and I gave her a hug, just trying to comfort her. I had mentioned that if she needed help with the kids, since he was gone, I would try to help, but she immediately refused. As it turned out, people had started attacking the house. She gave me my stuff, paid for the wages with a little more added. I had completely forgot, and said she appreciated it, but it would be better off if I just took a step back from the family, as she didn't want me getting hurt for being associated with them. To this day, I still think about them, and it still scares me after thinking about what could have happened. I still talk to the younger kids, who are a lot older, and even helped tutor the younger girl. I helped the oldest when he started high school because I noticed that the kids were bullying him for what his dad had done, which was awful considering it wasn't the fault of the family. I grew up in a really safe city in the Midwest, in an even safer neighborhood, sort of set back in the woods, and separated from the main part of town. I haven't had a lot of creepy encounters in my short life, knock on wood, so this is pretty much the most afraid I've ever been. I was 11 at the time and had just passed a CPR and babysitting essentials course at my rec. My neighborhood was very close-knit. All of the kids on my street played together, and because of my 2 younger brothers, I would soon become the automatic babysitter for the 3 families we lived close to. I'd look after my brothers for short amounts of time, but this was my first job as a real babysitter, watching the 2 grade school-aged children who lived across the street. They were family friends. The parents had promised to be home by 11 p.m., and I knew that my parents were home and ready to step in if I needed anything. So I was a little nervous but felt like I had things under control. The kids were a novice babysitter's dream. They had been trained that they are only allowed to choose one treat each before bed, and actually refused my offer to let them finish the show we were watching because it was their bedtime and they still needed to brush their teeth first. I was floored, but it made my job super easy, so I tucked them in and I headed back downstairs to watch TV until their parents returned. The mom is an interior designer, so their house is spacious and absolutely beautiful. Their living room is at the back of the house, with floor-to-ceiling windows and great views of the woods in their backyard. The couch is set up with its back to those windows, and I was watching TV with their elderly white lab, Alex. Out of the corner of my eye, I thought I saw something large and light-colored brush past the window behind me. I thought it might just be a deer, but I was 11 and alone and I had an overactive imagination, so I began to feel uneasy and pretty on edge. The parents weren't due back for another 2 hours, so I walked into the kitchen to call my mom and dad for a reassurance. Alex followed. Their kitchen faces the living room, with the house phone on the counter. This was before cell phones were a thing. Standing at the counter dialing my parents, I had a clear view through the broad archway into the living room, and out those enormous windows into the backyard. Alex laid down at my feet as I stood next to the counter, and told my mom that I thought I had seen something out the window. Hearing her voice was as comforting and reassuring as I thought it would be, so I told her that no, I didn't need Dad to come over, and that yes, I would call her if I needed anything at all. I had hung up the phone and sat down on the floor to rub Alex's ears and belly for a few minutes, still kind of wary of the living room. I hadn't been there too long before I caught a glimpse of something odd outside those giant windows. I looked harder, past the glare of the TV, and noticed a tiny light bobbing around in the woods. Probably just a neighbor, I thought, but as I watched, the light seemed to be moving in what was undeniably my direction. My whole body froze and I stared as the light got closer and closer to the living room windows, and at some point I realized, with complete and paralyzing horror, that the light had grown large enough that the source had to be right outside the house. The beam swung from one side of the living room to the other, and then settled directly on my face. I don't think I even squinted in the bright light as it shone through the window into my eyes. I was too startled. Alex snoozed on, placid in his old age, and entirely unaware that my heart had pretty much stopped beating. The light moved again, this time swinging away to illuminate a face from underneath. I saw dark, hollow eye sockets and the glowing curves of someone's cheeks, but the face's details were lost in the harsh angle of the flashlight's beam. At this point, I was trying with all my might to scream, or to move my fingers enough to dial 911, or to move out of view of the window. Literally anything would have been better than sitting there with my mouth open, and tears in my eyes like a stuffed turkey. But I had never felt this kind of icy terror before, and was completely immobilized by it. Everything felt like it was moving in slow motion, and I was totally powerless. The light swung around to point at me, and then quickly moved back underneath the horrible face outside. It repeated this pattern once or twice, and then it suddenly disappeared. The flashlight had been turned off, and for whatever reason, that was enough to finally let me move again. I quickly stood and hit dial, about to call 911, as I mentally debated whether to hole up in the master bedroom with the children, or just grab them and try to run out the front door to my parents' house. The rec class had not prepared me for this. Before I even got as far as the foyer, and the first one, though, I had heard a loud boom and felt my gut leap into my throat, as I realized that I had remembered to close the main garage doors and lock the door from the garage to the laundry room, but couldn't remember locking the main door from the garage to their backyard. I almost dropped the phone as someone began pounding on the interior door. Through the pounding though, I could hear a voice. A really familiar voice. "It's Dad! Let me in!" I stumbled over, completely numb, and I unlocked the door. My dad could hardly stand up. He was laughing so hard. Apparently my mom had sent him over to anyways to check on me, and make sure that there was nothing to be afraid of. He had done a quick sweep of the woods and backyard with a flashlight, under the assumption that Mom had mentioned he'd be coming over. He saw me through the window and attempted to show me it was him by pointing at me and then shining the light on his face, under his freaking face. He was unaware that these shadows made it impossible to tell who he was, until he saw the color drain from my face and realized that he had just given me the scare of my life. He thought it was pretty funny. I didn't really agree. Up until I heard my dad's voice, I really thought that I was about to get all kinds of murdered.